One night when my family was sitting together for dinner, my grandfather suddenly grew quiet, looked directly at me, and revealed that the man I had always called my father was never really my father, leaving me shattered and questioning everything I believed. I'm writing this because I need someone to understand how a single sentence can detonate your entire existence. 3 months ago, I had a wife, 2 kids, and what I thought was a solid marriage built on honesty and trust. Now I'm sitting in a studio apartment that smells like microwave dinners and regret, trying to figure out how learning the truth about my birth led me to destroy everyone else's life. It was supposed to be a celebration dinner. My wife Rachel had just gotten promoted to senior accountant at her firm, and we'd driven to my parents' house with our kids, Tommy, who's 8, and Sophie, who's 6, to share the good news with 3 generations of family. Grandpa Joe was there, which was rare these days. At 87, he mostly stayed in his assisted living facility, but Mom had picked him up for the occasion. He'd been quieter than usual during dinner, picking at his meatloaf while the rest of us chatted about Rachel's promotion, Tommy's upcoming soccer season, Sophie's dance recital. "Daddy, tell Grandpa Joe about my pirouettes," Sophie said, spinning around the dining room in her pink dress. "She's gotten so good," I told him, watching my daughter beam with pride. "Takes after her grandmother's grace." That's when Grandpa Joe set down his fork and looked at me with these eyes I'd never seen before. Not the warm, twinkling eyes of the man who taught me to fish and throw a curveball. These were the eyes of someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear anymore. "Michael," he said, and his voice was steady in a way that made everyone stop talking. "There's something you need to know. Something we should have told you a long time ago." The room went dead silent. Mom's face went white. Dad started shaking his head, making these little no motions with his hands. "Dad, please," Mom whispered. "Not now. Not like this." But Grandpa Joe wasn't listening to her anymore. He was looking right at me, and I could see 30 years of secrets cracking behind his eyes. "The man you call your father," he said, pointing at Dad, "isn't your biological father. Your mother had an affair, and you're the result of that affair." The words hit the table like a. Sophie stopped spinning. Tommy's mouth fell open. Rachel reached for my hand, but I pulled it away because suddenly nothing made sense, and I needed space to process what I'd just heard. "What?" I said, because that was all my brain could produce. Mom was crying now, these horrible choking sobs. Dad looked like he'd been shot. But Grandpa Joe just kept going, like he'd been waiting decades to finally tell this story. "It was 1985. Your mother was 22, married to your father for 3 years, and she had an affair with her boss. A man named David Chen, who owned the restaurant where she waitressed. When she got pregnant, she didn't know whose baby you were until you were born, looking nothing like either of them." I stared at the man I'd called Dad for 35 years. The man who taught me to drive, who walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who cried when Tommy was born, and called him his grandson. "Is this true?" I asked him. Dad's shoulders sagged. "Yes." That one word destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. "Why?" I asked, looking between Mom and Dad. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it didn't matter," Dad said, and his voice was breaking. "You were my son from the moment you were born. I raised you, I loved you, I never once thought of you as anything but my child." "But you lied to me," I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder. "For 35 years, you lied to me." "We protected you," Mom said through her tears. "We gave you a stable family, a father who adored you, a normal childhood. What good would the truth have done?" I looked around the table at my family. Tommy and Sophie were staring at me with confusion and fear. Rachel was holding Sophie's hand, trying to comfort her while processing this bombshell herself. The people I loved most in the world were watching me fall apart in real time. "I need to leave," I said, standing up so fast I knocked over my chair. "Michael, please," Mom said. "Let's talk about this." "Talk about what?" "About how my entire life is built on a lie? About how the man I thought was my father is some stranger who was kind enough to raise another man's mistake?" "You're not a mistake," Dad said, and he was crying now, too. "You were never a mistake. You were the best thing that ever happened to us." But I was already grabbing my keys, already walking toward the door, already running from the truth I couldn't handle. Rachel followed me to the car with the kids. "Michael, wait," she said. "We need to talk about this together." "I can't," I said. "I can't think straight. I can't process this with everyone watching me." "Then let's go home and talk there." I looked at Tommy and Sophie in the backseat, their faces full of worry and confusion. How do you explain to your children that their grandfather just revealed their father's entire identity was a lie? "I need space," I said. "I need time to think." "How much time?" Rachel asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "I don't know." I dropped them off at our house and drove to the nearest bar. Then I sat there for 6 hours, drinking whiskey and trying to understand how the people who raised me could keep such a massive secret for my entire life. The bartender, a woman named Kelly, listened to my story without judgment. She had kind eyes and a soft voice, and she didn't try to fix me or tell me everything would be okay. She just listened while I talked and cried and fell apart. "That's rough," she said when I finished. Finding out your whole identity was built on a lie. Right? Like, who am I if I'm not who I thought I was? What else have they been lying about? Kelly refilled my drink and leaned against the bar. Sounds like they loved you enough to give you a stable family, she said. That's not nothing. But it's not honest, I said. My whole life, I've prided myself on being honest with my wife, with my kids, with everyone. And it turns out I'm the product of deception. You didn't deceive anyone. Your parents chose to protect you. By lying to me. By loving you. I stayed until last call, then went to a hotel instead of going home. I couldn't face Rachel's questions or the kids' confusion. I needed to figure out who I was before I could be a husband or father to anyone. That was my first mistake. Running away instead of leaning into my family when I needed them most. The second mistake was going back to that bar the next night. Kelly was working again, and she remembered my story, asked how I was processing everything. It felt good to talk to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in the outcome, someone who could listen without trying to fix or judge, or comfort. Have you talked to your wife? She asked. Not really. She's been texting, but I'm not ready. What about your parents? What's there to say? They lied to me for 35 years. They watched me struggle with identity issues my whole life, wondering why I didn't look like Dad, why I was so different from everyone else in the family. They had the answer and kept it from me. Kelly nodded sympathetically. My parents divorced when I was 12, she said. Turned out my dad had been cheating for years. I hated him for lying, but I also understood why he did it. Sometimes people lie because the truth seems too dangerous. The truth is always better than lies, I said. Is it? Would knowing earlier have made your childhood better? Would it have made you closer to your biological father or more distant from the man who raised you? She had a point, but I was too angry to admit it. I started going to that bar every night after work, telling Kelly about my childhood, about the moments that made more sense now that I knew the truth. Why Mom always looked sad when people said I had Dad's eyes. Why Dad sometimes seemed to study my face like he was looking for himself and couldn't find it. Why family photos always felt slightly off to me, like I was photoshopped into someone else's life. I keep thinking about all the lies, I told Kelly one night. Not just the big one about my father, but all the little ones that supported it. Every time someone said I looked like Dad, they went along with it. Every time I wondered about my heritage, they made up stories. Sounds like they were trying to make you feel like you belonged, Kelly said. But I didn't belong. I was living in someone else's life. Kelly started staying after her shift to talk with me. She was easy to be around, understanding in a way that felt rare. She didn't judge my anger or try to rush me toward forgiveness. She just listened and validated my feelings and made me feel less crazy for being so torn up about this. After 2 weeks of nightly conversations, Kelly and I kissed in the parking lot outside the bar. It wasn't planned, it wasn't smart, but it felt like the first real thing that had happened to me since Grandpa Joe's revelation. I should go home, I said afterward. You should, she agreed. But will you? I didn't. I went to a hotel with Kelly that night, and for a few hours, I forgot about the lies and the betrayal and the family I was neglecting. I forgot about being the man I thought I was and just existed in the moment with someone who knew me as I was now, not as the person I'd been built up to be. Rachel was waiting for me when I finally came home the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, smelling like another woman's perfume and bad decisions. Where have you been? She asked, but her tone said she already knew. I needed space, I said, which was true but not the whole truth. Space to cheat on your wife and abandon your children? The kids were at school, thank God. Sophie would have been devastated to see Mommy and Daddy fighting like this. I haven't abandoned anyone, I said. Really? Because Tommy asked me yesterday if you were leaving us like his friend's dad left. And I didn't know what to tell him because I don't know where my husband goes every night or when he's coming home or if he's coming home. She was right, and I knew she was right, but admitting it meant taking responsibility for the pain I was causing. It was easier to stay angry about the lies my parents had told than to acknowledge the lies I was telling now. My whole life is built on deception, I said. I'm just finding out who I am. Who you are as a husband and father, Rachel said. That hasn't changed. The man who raised you hasn't changed. The love in this family hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is you've decided to end everything up because you can't handle the truth about your birth. You don't understand, I said. Then help me understand. Talk to me instead of whatever her name is. I looked at my wife, this woman who'd stood by me through everything, who'd built a life with me based on honesty and partnership and love. She deserved better than the man I was becoming, better than the lies I was telling, better than the choice I was making to prioritize my pain over her stability. But I was too deep in my spiral to see it. I can't be the husband you need right now, I said. I can't be the father the kids need. I don't even know who I am anymore. So figure it out, she said. But figure it out here, with us, with the people who love you no matter what your DNA says. Instead, I packed a bag and moved into the hotel where Kelly and I had spent that first night together. I told myself I needed space to process, time to figure out my identity without the pressure of being everything to everyone. I was running away from responsibility and toward the temporary comfort of someone who didn't expect me to be strong or stable or present. My parents called every day, begging me to come home, to talk, to let them explain. I ignored most of their calls, but finally answered when Mom called, crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry we didn't tell you. We thought we were protecting you, but we were protecting ourselves. We were scared of losing you." "You have lost me," I said, which was cruel and untrue but felt good to say in the moment. "Please don't do this to your family," she said. "Don't let our mistake destroy your marriage." "Your mistake created my marriage," I said. "If you'd told me the truth, I would have grown up different, made different choices, maybe married someone else entirely." "Do you believe that? Do you think knowing about David Chen would have changed who you are?" The honest answer was no. I was still the same person who'd fallen in love with Rachel, who'd wanted to be a father, who'd built a career and a life based on my own choices and values. But honesty wasn't what I was after anymore. I was after validation for my pain, justification for my anger, permission to up my life because other people had first. I stayed at the hotel for 3 weeks, seeing Kelly most nights, avoiding my real life like it was a job I'd been fired from. Rachel stopped calling after the first week. The kids stopped asking when Daddy was coming home, which zobus me how worse than their constant questions. Then Tommy's teacher called. "I'm concerned about Tommy's behavior lately," she said. "He's been acting out in class, getting into fights with other kids. Is everything okay at home?" "We're going through some family issues," I said, which was the understatement of the year. "He seems very angry and confused. He told me his daddy doesn't live at home anymore because his family lied to him. I think he might benefit from counseling. My 8-year-old son was acting out because his father had abandoned him to sort through emotional issues with a bartender instead of a therapist. My 6-year-old daughter was probably wondering why Daddy didn't love them enough to come home. I was becoming the kind of father I'd sworn I'd never be. The kind who puts his pain above his children's stability, who teaches them that love is conditional, that families fall apart when things get hard. But instead of going home, I doubled down on my destructive choices. "They're better off without me right now," I told Kelly that night. "I'm too messed up to be a good father." "Or maybe being a father is exactly what you need to focus on," she said, and for a moment I heard something different in her voice. Less sympathy, more challenge. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been wallowing in this identity crisis for a month while your kids wonder why their dad doesn't love them anymore. Maybe it's time to stop making this about you and start thinking about them." Even Kelly, who'd been enabling my self-pity for weeks, was starting to see through my excuses. "I thought you understood," I said. "I understand that I don't understand why you're choosing to exclude everyone else because of it." That night, alone in my hotel room, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding. I wasn't having an identity crisis. I was having a character crisis. I was choosing to be the kind of man who abandons his family when life gets complicated, who blames other people's ancient mistakes for his current bad decisions. The man who raised me would never have done this. Dad, the man I'd called Dad for 35 years, had faced a much harder choice when he found out Mom was pregnant with another man's child. He could have left, could have demanded a divorce, could have refused to raise a child who wasn't biologically his. Instead, he chose love. He chose commitment. He chose to be the father I needed, regardless of genetics. And I was repaying that sacrifice by proving I wasn't worthy of it. I called Rachel that night, finally ready to come home and face the consequences of my choices. "It's too late," she said, and her voice was flat, emotionless. "I filed for divorce yesterday." "Rachel, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you need space? That you were confused? That cheating on your wife and abandoning your children was somehow justified because your parents kept a secret?" I tried to tell her about the identity crisis, about feeling like my whole life was built on lies, about needing to figure out who I was. But every excuse sounded pathetic coming out of my mouth. "You want to know who you are?" she said. "You're the man who took away his family because he couldn't handle disappointment like an. You're the man who taught his children that love is conditional, that daddies leave when things get hard. You're the man who turned a family secret into a family tragedy." She hung up, and I sat in that hotel room understanding for the first time that learning the truth about my birth hadn't destroyed my family. My reaction to that truth had. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to the hotel room that had become my pathetic excuse for a home. Rachel was asking for full custody of Tommy and Sophie, spousal support, and half of everything we'd built together in 12 years of marriage. She wasn't being vindictive. The custody arrangement included visitation rights, supervised at first but progressing to weekends if I could prove stability. The financial demands were fair, maybe even generous, considering I was the one who'd blown up our family. But seeing it all laid out in legal language made it real. I wasn't temporarily separated while I figured things out. I was divorced. My children were going to grow up in a broken home because their father couldn't handle learning he was adopted at 35. I called my parents for the first time since moving out. "Michael," Mom said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "How are you? Where are you?" "I'm getting divorced," I said without preamble. Rachel filed papers. She's taking the kids. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Oh, honey, Mom finally said, and she started crying again. I'm so sorry. This is all our fault. No, I said, and I meant it for the first time. This is my fault. You kept a secret. I destroyed a marriage. Those aren't the same thing. Come home, she said. Come talk to us. Let us help you figure this out. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed to understand my own choices before I could face theirs. Kelly and I had ended things the night I tried to go home to Rachel. She'd been surprisingly cold about it, like she'd been expecting me to choose my wife all along and was annoyed it had taken me so long to do the obvious thing. You used me, she said when I told her I was going back to my family. We used each other, I replied, which was true but not kind. I listened to you, supported you, and helped you through the hardest time in your life. And now you're just walking away like I meant nothing. I wanted to point out that she'd helped me destroy my marriage, not save it. That her support had enabled my worst instincts instead of challenging them. But blame was what had gotten me into this mess, and I was trying to learn how to take responsibility instead. I'm sorry, I said. You deserved better than being my escape from reality. So now I was alone in a hotel room, facing the consequences of choices I'd made while telling myself I was the victim of other people's deceptions. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Susan Martinez, who specialized in family dynamics and identity issues. I'd found her online, drawn to her credentials in adoption counseling and family secrets. Tell me about the night you learned the truth, she said during our first session. I walked her through the dinner, Grandpa Joe's revelation, and my family's reactions. She listened without judgment, taking notes while I explained how devastated I'd felt learning my entire identity was built on a lie. How did it change who you are? She asked when I finished. What do you mean? You learned your biological father is someone else. Did that change your personality? Your memories? Your relationships with your children? I thought about it. No, but did it change the fact that the man who raised you taught you to ride a bike, attended your baseball games, walked you down the aisle at your wedding? No. Did it change the love you feel for your wife and children? Of course not. Then what exactly did it change? I sat there, unable to answer, because the truth was it hadn't changed anything meaningful about my life. It had just given me information I didn't know how to process, and I'd let that information justify abandoning everything I cared about. I felt betrayed, I said finally. Like my parents had lied to me my whole life. They did lie to you, Dr. Martinez said. But lies can serve different purposes. Some lies are meant to harm, some are meant to protect. What do you think your parents' motivation was? They said they wanted to protect me. Do you believe them? I remembered Dad crying at that dinner table, insisting I was never a mistake, that I was the best thing that had ever happened to them. I remembered Mom's face when Grandpa Joe started talking, the terror in her eyes at seeing a secret she'd carried for decades finally coming to light. Yeah, I said. I think I do. So your parents made a decision 35 years ago to give you a stable family structure rather than burden you with complicated questions about paternity. And when you learned about this decision, you responded by what? By having an affair and abandoning my children. Saying it out loud made it sound even worse than it felt. Help me understand the connection, Dr. Martinez said. How did learning about your parents' protective lie justify lying to your wife? That's when I started crying, because there was no connection. There was no justification. I'd just been so angry and wanted someone back, and the people who'd loved me most had been the easiest targets. I was furious that they'd kept this secret, I said through my tears. I felt like if they could lie to me for 35 years, then honesty didn't matter anymore. Like I was free to make my own rules. But you didn't feel free, did you? You felt guilty every time you were with Kelly. You felt sick every time you ignored your children's calls. She was right. The affair hadn't felt like freedom. It had felt like revenge, and revenge always costs more than it's worth. I wanted them to be the way I was, I admitted. And did they? I thought about Rachel's face when she'd found out about Kelly. The betrayal, the devastation, the way she'd looked at me like I was a stranger. I thought about Tommy acting out in school, Sophie asking why Daddy didn't come home anymore. Yes, I said. They were worse than I did. How does that feel now? Horrible. Like I'm the worst person in the world. You're not the worst person in the world, Dr. Martinez said. You're a person who made terrible choices when you were in pain. The question is, what do you want to do about it now? I wanted to fix it, to undo the damage, to somehow convince Rachel that I wasn't the man I'd become during those awful weeks. But I was starting to understand that some choices don't get undone. Some trust, once broken, stays broken. The first step was reaching out to my parents. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning, my hands shaking as I rang the doorbell of the home where I'd grown up. Dad answered the door, and his face went through about 6 emotions in 2 seconds. Relief, joy, fear, hope, uncertainty. Michael, he said, and his voice cracked on my name. Hi, Dad. I called him Dad, and I meant it. Whatever his genetics, This man had been my father in every way that mattered. He'd earned that title through 35 years of love and support and presence. Mom appeared behind him, and she started crying the moment she saw me. "I'm sorry," I said to both of them. "I'm sorry I ran away. I'm sorry I blamed you for my choices. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate what you gave me." They both hugged me, and for a moment I was 8 years old again, safe in my parents' arms, sure that they could fix anything. "We should have told you," Mom said. "We should have found a way to explain it when you were old enough to understand." "Maybe," I said. "But I understand why you didn't. And I understand now that it doesn't change anything important." Dad pulled back to look at me. "You'll always be my son," he said. "Biology doesn't determine family. Love does. Choice does. I chose to be your father every day for 35 years, and I'd make the same choice again. Even knowing how I'd react to the truth? Even knowing that." We talked for hours that day. They told me the whole story, how Mom had been struggling in their early marriage, how she'd found comfort with her boss during a rough patch, how she'd immediately regretted the affair but couldn't undo it. How they'd decided together to raise me as their own, to never let me feel like I was different or unwanted. "We were young and scared," Mom said. "We didn't know the right thing to do, so we did what felt like love." "What about my biological father?" I asked. "David Chen. Is he still alive?" "He died 5 years ago," Dad said. "Cancer. He never knew about you. Your mother made the decision not to tell him when she found out she was pregnant." "Do I have half-siblings?" "2 daughters. They're adults now, married with kids of their own. I had sisters I'd never met, nieces and nephews who didn't know I existed. An entire other family built around a man who'd unknowingly fathered me during a moment of mutual bad judgment." "Do you want to reach out to them?" Mom asked. I thought about it. Part of me was curious, wanted to see if I looked like them, if we shared interests or mannerisms or traits. But a bigger part of me realized that family isn't about genetics. It's about the people who show up, who stay, who choose you every day. "Maybe someday," I said. "Right now, I need to focus on the family I already have. The family I'm losing because I couldn't handle this news." Dad leaned forward in his chair. "Have you talked to Rachel?" "She won't take my calls. I've tried emailing, but she doesn't respond. I think she's done with me." "Can you blame her?" Mom asked gently. "No. If she'd done what I did, I'd probably never forgive her either." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know. Accept the divorce, I guess. Try to be a better father during whatever visitation I get. Hope that someday Tommy and Sophie understand that I lost my mind temporarily and that it had nothing to do with them." "That's not enough," Dad said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you can't just accept defeat and move on. You have to fight for your family. You have to prove to Rachel that the man she married is still in there somewhere, that the man who abandoned her was temporarily insane." "How do I do that when she won't even talk to me?" "Actions," Mom said. "You show her through your behavior that you've changed, that you understand what you did wrong, that you're committed to being better." I started small. I moved out of the hotel and into a real apartment, something stable where the kids could visit. I kept going to therapy, working through my identity issues and my tendency to blame other people for my problems. I wrote letters to Rachel that I didn't send, trying to find words that could explain and apologize without making excuses. The supervised visitations with Tommy and Sophie were heartbreaking. They were polite but distant, like I was a family friend they hadn't seen in a while, rather than their father. "How's school?" I'd ask Tommy. "Fine," he'd answer, not looking up from his coloring book. "Are you excited about soccer season starting?" "Yeah, I guess." Sophie was even more withdrawn. She'd sit next to me during our visits but wouldn't initiate conversation, wouldn't ask for help with anything, wouldn't show me the pictures she was drawing. "They're protecting themselves," the social worker explained after one particularly difficult visit. "Children adapt to abandonment by not getting too attached. They're afraid you'll leave again." "I'm not going to leave again." "They don't know that. You'll have to prove it through consistency over time." I started showing up to Tommy's soccer games, even though I wasn't supposed to interact with him directly. I'd sit in my car in the parking lot, watching him play, making sure he could see me there. I wanted him to know that even if I couldn't be his full-time father anymore, I was still invested in his life. Rachel would spot me sometimes, and she'd look angry or just tired. But she didn't ask me to leave, didn't get a restraining order, didn't try to prevent me from being present in whatever limited way I could manage. After the third game, she walked over to my car. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Watching my son play soccer." "You could have watched him play soccer for the past 2 months if you hadn't decided to uproot our family." "I know. I'm trying to be present now." "Now? Now that it's too late? Now that he's been acting out in school and having nightmares about you leaving?" The nightmares were new information, and they hit me like a punch to the stomach. "He's having nightmares?" "He dreams that you come home and then disappear again. He wakes up crying, asking if you're gone forever." I started crying right there in the soccer field parking lot, thinking about my 8-year-old son reliving my abandonment in his sleep. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't undo trauma, Michael. Sorry doesn't explain to a 6-year-old why her daddy chose a bartender over his family. It wasn't about choosing Kelly over you. It was about being so angry and that I couldn't think straight. No, Rachel said, and her voice was firm. Don't make excuses. You chose to handle your pain in the most destructive way possible. You chose to punish me and the kids for something your parents did 35 years ago. Own it. She was right. I'd been making excuses for months, trying to justify my choices by pointing to other people's mistakes. But the truth was simple. I'd learned something upsetting about my past and responded by destroying my future. You're right, I said. I chose the people who loved me because I was angry at the people who'd lied to me. There's no excuse for that. Rachel studied my face for a long moment. The man I married would never have done what you did, she said finally. I know. I don't know who I was during those weeks, but it wasn't me. It was some angry, selfish version of me that I never want to be again. How do I know that? How do I trust that you won't fall apart again the next time life gets complicated? I didn't have an answer for that, because trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with time and consistency, and proof that you've changed. I don't know how to convince you, I said. But I'm willing to spend however long it takes trying. Rachel walked away without responding, but something in her posture had softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. That night, I called my parents to tell them about the conversation. She's protecting herself and the children, Mom said. She loved you completely, and you broke that love. Of course, she's not ready to trust you again. Do you think there's hope? I think, Dad said slowly, that the kind of love you two built doesn't disappear overnight. But it can be damaged beyond repair if you don't handle this carefully. What should I do? Be patient. Be consistent. Show her through your actions that you've learned from this, that you understand what you lost and why. And accept that she might never be ready to try again. The hardest part was accepting that my choices had consequences I couldn't control. I could change my behavior, commit to therapy, prove my stability, but I couldn't force Rachel to forgive me or trust me or want me back. All I could do was become the kind of man who deserved forgiveness and hope that someday it would be offered. But hope, I was learning, is a dangerous thing when you're the one who broke what you're hoping to repair. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in October, 6 months after Grandpa Joe's revelation destroyed my understanding of everything I thought I knew. I sat in a courtroom next to my lawyer, watching a judge dissolve 12 years of marriage with a few signatures and legal phrases that reduced our love story to asset division and custody schedules. Rachel was there with her attorney, looking professional and composed in a navy blue suit I'd never seen before. She didn't look at me once during the proceedings, didn't acknowledge my presence even when the judge asked if we both understood the terms we were agreeing to. Yes, Your Honor, we both said at different times, and just like that, it was over. The custody arrangement gave me every other weekend and Wednesday dinners, no longer supervised, now that I'd proven I had stable housing and employment. Tommy and Sophie would spend alternating holidays with me, summer vacation sply.t.